We are joined today by Neita Demetrius, who is a youth and family counselor. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Thanks, Alan, for the invite. Anyway, so in my role here in Canada, where I'm living, the youth and family counselor role is it changes between schools, it changes between fields, but for mine specifically, I find myself working in a school setting as a youth and family counselor. There's also school counselors at our school. It's a little confusing, but in my youth and family counseling role, I'm working alongside the educators and the education assistants and the administration of the school to work with families that have identified that there's some needs that they have, whether that's academically or socially. I'm working with the students in the elementary school that I currently am employed at, James Bay Elementary. And so it makes it so I have a ton of different kinds of, every day is a little different, basically. Working with different kids, different families, maybe with just with parents, or perhaps it's just with the students, and a mix of both. So my youth and family counseling role, which is actually my title at one of the jobs I'm doing, that's what that looks like. I'm still doing counseling in another role as well, actually a little bit more involved, still with youth and families, but through our Transition House Society, Victoria Women's Transition House here in Victoria. Now that's the bulk of my time, and that has me working with children who have witnessed abuse or been exposed to domestic violence. And I've been doing that for a number of years now, ever since I finished my 4-year degree at the University of Victoria.
Okay, that's really amazing. It's amazing to have an experience, such an array of experiences as well. And outside of work, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you enjoy doing?
Yeah, well, I wasn't late to this interview, but my sister was saying, "Oh, are you going to get home in time?" Because she knew I was just out up island at a local mountain that we enjoy hiking. I've actually, first time I was at this one, Mount Zuhalem. What I'm getting at is I love hiking. I love getting outside. I love being in nature. It's kind of like when I'm not working, I'm outdoor doing something. So, I mean, it's actually been, it's been interesting with the social climate we're in, social distancing, physical distancing, what you are and aren't allowed to do, what places you're allowed to go and not, making sure that you're staying safe for the sake of yourself and the other people around. Taking that into account's definitely been interesting, but as much as I can, I love getting out and doing things outdoors. It's my big way of unwinding and just recharging.
For sure. Yeah, that's really great. It's definitely nice to spend time outdoors. So you mentioned this trying time. Yeah, so many of us around the world, as you mentioned, are at the moment physically distancing. So we're missing a lot of the social part of our lives, which can be pretty difficult for many of us. So can you give us some examples and ways that we can cope with this anxiety, the stress, which often comes with isolation?
Yeah, using the word isolation is actually, it's really important that you say it that way, because in my field, especially in my work at the Transition House, for years, what we've been telling clients and anybody that's accessing service, whatever you do, don't isolate.
Mm,
It's completely opposite of what we're being told on a widespread scale now. And as social beings, like it goes against our nature. Um, Isolation is a big problem. And in my field, isolation is a way that an abusive person in a relationship can take people away from their support systems so that they're more impressionable, so that they can have their power taken away. And an abusive person can have control over somebody that doesn't have a lot of support systems. And so I'm keenly aware of the challenge that social isolation does. And so, it's really interesting that because of this isolation that we've all been told we have to be in, there is a lot of stress and anxiety, and mental health challenges have grown in recent months. I know there's some statistics. I can't remember the numbers, but I've heard across the board in Canada, at least, that domestic violence has increased to an extent. And I mean, my own Victoria Women's Transition House, our shelter, has had increased number of people asking for service. It's like you said, it's very much a time of anxiety and stress. Sounds like your question was around how to cope with that. And, you know, as somebody that works in this field with a whole array of people from different backgrounds, I've learned that there are sometimes some strategies and techniques that can work across the board, but when it really comes down to it, I work with people on an individual basis to come up with plans, to come up with strategies that work for them to deal with their specific ways that anxiety shows up. So, for instance, working with somebody who, let's say, an introvert, sometimes social isolation isn't a huge problem. I know a number of people that have actually felt relatively unaffected by the big changes that have been happening, because here in Victoria, we're really blessed. There's not a huge pandemic outburst happening. It's not every one of our neighbors is showing symptoms. No, we're healthy. So that part of the stress and anxiety isn't there. But for people who socially aren't able to do the things they wanted to, I would always be talking to them, introverts or anybody, find the things that give you rest. So let's say just as easy as spending time reading a book, doing things that help calm your body and calm your mind. You know, it's different for people like myself. I'm a very social being, the most extroverted extrovert there is, perhaps. And so, you know, until only recently, it was actually really stressful for me as well. The fact that I couldn't spend time with the people that recharge me. You know, when it comes to actual stress and anxiety, one thing that I have found across the board is a really good practice for people to understand and know a little bit about is this concept of mindfulness or grounding, relaxation techniques, whatever you want to call it, whatever it's known as. It's all about finding a way to take your thoughts away from what's bumping around inside your head, the things that are taking up your waking hours, and reminding yourself of being in the present. So an example of that would be somebody who is worrying a lot about COVID exposure, let's say. A grounding exercise I would do with that person might be, okay, so get into a comfortable stance, whether you're sitting or standing, wherever you are, and maybe close your eyes, maybe lower your gaze, whatever. But think about your toes. And so I'd get a person to wiggle their toes. And then I'd say, bring your attention up to your calves and I'd make them feel what is going on that part of their body. And I'd move all the way up through their body, across their extremities, so that their attention touches each one of those spots in their body. And, you know, even right now, think about how does your ear feel right now? I've got earbuds in, and so I can kind of feel them inside my ears right now as I'm talking to you. Or maybe I've got a shirt on, and well, I can feel it on my shoulders, the way it sits there. Even just something as simple as that mindfulness, that grounding technique helps somebody that's really in anxiety or panic mode to come back into their body and realize that whatever's going on, they can start to regulate their breathing and their emotions so that they can actually get back into their prefrontal cortex. You want to be in your thinking brain. That's just the science behind it, is you calm your body so that you can get your thoughts in line.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a very practical and useful technique, especially for those. And as you mentioned, we are exposed to a lot of negativity in the situation, and it can seem very bleak and can be difficult to not get into that state of anxiety and panic, especially if you scroll through news, if you scroll through social media. There's a lot of negativity that surrounds us. So I
Totally.
guess a follow-up question to that would be, how do we rise above that, or how do we mitigate the impact it has on our mental health?
Well, what I've done and what many people are doing, I've heard, is limiting your exposure to social media. Um, there is panic is it spreads when people talk about it,
Right.
and there's an element of just kind of ignoring what's going on in saying like, oh, you shouldn't be on social media. Yes, there is an element of just kind of putting your head in the sand and not being overwhelmed by it. We're in exceptional times, and it is extremely okay for people to self-soothe. And when I say that, I'm meaning, if you feel overwhelmed when you go through a Facebook feed and there's so many articles talking about the numbers of people who've died today or yesterday and trends and statistics, and for if those things add to a person's stress, then I really would say, like I've gotten rid of Instagram and I haven't been on it in a long time. I don't want to see those things, so don't put them in front of yourself. It can be difficult. That's a pretty pat answer, and it's maybe not possible for people who need Facebook for advertising for a business or for any reasons. If it's necessary you're on there, then that's a challenge. But limiting your exposure to the things that are stressful and maximizing your exposure to the things that bring you peace and calm, I mean, that's always a first step.
Hmm. Yeah, can you expand a little bit on, you mentioned you can self-soothe during this time. I've been talking to a few people in the field as well as like teachers. I know that it's a difficult transition to online school as well. And a thing that I keep hearing is you have to be lenient on yourself. You have to be able to step away, but also to, you know, take this time. It's a very difficult time. It's a very unsure time for everyone around the world. And I think to an extent, it's a lot of people are saying it's okay to step back. It's okay to do those things that like not necessarily be productive, not to put that pressure on yourself. So can you expand a little bit on the self-soothing aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a I'm the kind of person that will be out of the house, working multiple jobs, doing volunteer positions, and finding myself in social interactions 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Like I'm not at home usually. So this has been jarring for me. And I'm not even at risk, at relative risk of contracting COVID with the social circles or the spaces I'm in right now. Um, so even for me, I found the transition challenging.
Mhm.
I can't actually sympathize with people who are in the midst, like let's say somebody living in San Francisco or New York City right now. I my heart goes out to those places and those people. I can't imagine what that's like right now. Hubs where COVID's running rampant, that's a whole new ball game. But you know what? When I look at how it's affected me, self-soothing, looking back and pulling back your expectations. I've had to do that a lot.
Mm.
I've had to find um, some solace in knowing that, first of all, I don't have to be doing as much as I want to. I also can't, and there's a piece of just coming to terms, the acceptance of what the situation is. I think for me, it's a little easier to accept it when I know that this is not forever. And I think that's one of the things that our leaders here in Canada have tried to impress on us, is that the measures of social distancing and closure of businesses and parks and all sorts of stuff, it's a measure that's really intensive, but it's only for a time. And so for me, self-soothing is attached to the finite period of time that this is, because sometimes you just have to manage. And I think there's a stigma attached to, oh, like COVID period, time to thrive, or, oh, you're at home all the time, so you better make your house look amazing and do all your renovations now that you have the time. Or, you know what? No, that's not where people's focus should be. It shouldn't be on productivity. It should be about making sure that people are safe. And for me, safety is that number one piece. That is the bar that right now we should all be finding ourselves saying, this is ground zero. If I'm stepping back, I want to make sure above anything else that my family is safe, my household is safe, the things that I am in control of are at a place of relative safety. If you can with confidence say that I have done everything I can to make my children have a safe home, then any parents that are dealing with now having to be homeschooling teachers as well, like, try and take a step back. Now there's more screen time happening for kids. Try to take a step back. Are they safe emotionally, physically? If you can say those things are happening during a world pandemic, then already you're doing well. And that for me is what I try to scale back those expectations for the people that I work with as much as possible, because otherwise people feel shame. People feel they should be doing enough. Those shoulds can be really damaging, and that kind of can spiral. I've seen it spiral into negative self-talk and depression and those things that we need to stay away from if we're going to kind of find our way through this pandemic with some positive mental health. It's a challenge, but I say pare it back to safety. You can self-soothe with the rest. You can find yourself thinking about your accomplishments with a grain of salt, because the things that we're going through right now have never been recorded in our time, in our parents' time, in our grandparents' time. This is incredibly new, and we're all going through this for the first time. So if you haven't done gardening in 6 weeks, you're okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely think it's important to note that it's okay if you're not being productive, if you're not doing those things. So yeah, I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of people are also faced with a very difficult and unsupportive environment where the escape used to be school, it used to be work, or even spending time with friends. So what should you do then? How do you stay safe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the question. I'm working with people right now who, on both ends of the spectrum, if school was their safe place, some of the students that I've worked with, well, now they're in that toxic environment more often, and they have no way of getting out. Once again, it comes down to, how do you cope? What do you do to manage your way through? How do I, as a counselor, not stigmatize people who maybe aren't dealing with it in the textbook best way?
Mm-hmm.
Managing our way through this pandemic, especially when you're cooped up at home, and that's your escapes like school and work, where they're not a possibility. Once again, safety needs to be number one. So if I go back to that piece, right off the bat, if physical safety is a problem, then call the police. Like, that's always one of those safety pieces, because, you know, in my work, abuse, that's about control and power. And so you want to make sure that there's somebody powerful that can help you there. And that's the police. That's their authority that they have in whatever state or city you're in. Baseline physical safety, get some help from the police, have a safety plan. I mean, that's what I work with families to create. Like, let's say two kids are going between mom's house and dad's house since they've separated. Whether now you're at mom's or dad's the same amount as before or not, what really matters is that for those kids who I work with, we need to make sure that they know how to stay safe at whichever house and whatever is going on. If there's one parent that's safer than the other, I would always work with that parent and say, hey, do your children know who they can call, or even how to make a call, depending on how old they are, to somebody that's safe? Do they know who's safe? Okay, so maybe they need to have a safe person outside their house. And even in COVID, I think it's okay to knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I need to use your phone because there's fighting happening at my house. You know
Mm,
what? When it comes to safety, the first responders here in Victoria, they are wearing masks, but they have to do their job. They need to get in people's spaces, into their houses. They need to do the things that promote safety. So once again, not feeling like you're alone, that you're fully isolated from the world. If you can go to a grocery store, you can get help. Like that's one of those things where safety precludes what we're being told to stay at home, not talk to anybody, or whatever. So, it's a roundabout way of saying still make sure that safety is the number one piece, because whether you're at your school, your work, or having that emotional reprieve from a stressful environment at home, if you can self-soothe and manage your way through this and have supports, like use FaceTime and Zoom and talk to your people, stay connected, phone calls, like play games virtually, like anything that can make you feel emotionally held. Yeah, I think that's a really important step.
right. I see. So, okay. Yeah, I definitely think it is a unique time where we do have an opportunity to as well to connect to people outside of it. But yeah, it's good to highlight that if you are faced with domestic violence and abuse, to call the police, to get out of the situation, to find a way out. So yeah, it's very good to highlight. So lastly, we have one more question. Are there any resources that you can recommend to help us through this time, especially in regard to mental health and if we're faced with a difficult environment, as you mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here in Victoria and in Canada, there's a number of different services that are available to the public, both online, over the phone, and otherwise. The first thing that came to mind, because some of your questions were more around like anxiety and stress, here in Canada, you can look up Anxiety Canada. It's a website, and on it there's ways to work step by step through anti-anxiety plans. So like mindfulness, regulation, all those kinds of topics. You can find those on anxietycanada.com. And they actually made a app. It's called Mind Shift. You can get that on the Apple Store or whatever. I use Apple, so I don't even know what the Google Play Store, whatever it is. You can find the app on all sorts of different platforms. And that's just another way that you can just quickly whip it up on your phone and go through a tailored plan for that you've worked with this app and the service, to figure out what are the things that help you kind of manage your anxiety. So I know that that's one that I've definitely referred people to. On that note about safety again, a resource that's really important for anybody to know is that if 911 isn't the appropriate call, if there's something happening and you're physically safe, but mentally you're not doing well, or emotionally you're unwell, maybe depression is growing really strong, or suicidal thoughts are happening. There in Canada here, we have there's a number of different kinds of crisis phone lines. And so let's say in BC here, there's the Kids Help Phone. You can literally put Kids Help Phone into Google and it'll have an awesome website that has like, press this link for the phone number, and press this link to chat with a counselor online for free, or press this link for resources and information about how to help kids that are needing emotional support. So there's like those kinds of internet-based resources, and crisis phone lines. There's a lot of them. There's the Kids Help Phone, like I just said. There's Youth in BC. both a website and it has a crisis line. My transition house as well also has a crisis line. So basically, there are people that can talk to you as well if emotionally or socially you need some crisis intervention. That's growing, actually. There's been a lot of money poured into these resources because now it's the primary way that people are getting help when they're at home. So using crisis lines, absolutely, that's important. And then just, I know people that are doing yoga online, like doing YouTube live videos or Facebook live workouts with others. Social interactions, there's tons of awesome video conferencing apps, some of the ones we've talked about and more, that can keep people connected. Stay connected as much as you can. I mean, that's the hard part about this all, but if you can have a good conversation with somebody you care about, physically, like neurotransmitters in your brain wise, like dopamine, that goes up. It's just spending time with people helps us. And safety is always number one. So make sure that you know some of those resources that you can access in your area. Cause I only know like Canada and the ones that are local, but yeah, it's important to know all those.
Okay. Yeah, and one more thing. So I know you mentioned that you're very physically active during this time. Would you recommend for other people to be physically active during this time as well? And as you mentioned, there are a lot of resources through YouTube, through Facebook, to work out with others as well as just work out on yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? Here in BC, we've had leaders that have been doing their best to give us information that makes sense about COVID and what we're being told to do and not do. That said, sometimes there's a little bit of like confusion around what you can and can't do. And I alluded to this earlier, but there's parks, there's provincial parks in our province here that have been closed, while some regional parks are open. So sometimes there's places you aren't allowed to go and places you are allowed to go. There's always physical and social distancing being told to be put at play. But they're also saying, in addition to stay at home, they're saying get outside. So it's like, sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, okay, what do I need right now? Is it going to be looked on poorly by like neighbors and other people around here? What do I need? What is okay to do? And then when you've kind of weighed the options, for us here on the island, they're saying like get outside and be in green space. The transmission of COVID happens much less outdoors anyways. So, I mean, I would always say, as much as possible, in a safe way, get outside and do something active, because I know I'm not the only person that gets stir crazy looking at a Zoom screen 6 to 8 hours a day. So no matter whether they're working at home like I am or doing whatever it is at their houses and feeling kind of crazy, I know I need it, and I'd hope that other people would access it too, because mentally we need to be in green space. We need to be outside. We need to be getting fresh air. So take care of your bodies as much as you can, but be gentle with yourself. If it's standards of exercise that are unattainable, don't feel like you have to get prepped for your marathon in 6 months now that you're at home all the time. But do prioritize your health, because that's what we need to do in this time.
Okay. And for those who can't get out, so I know in Kazakhstan, you're quarantined, you don't have an opportunity to go out, the parks are closed. So for those who are at home, what should they be doing?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where if you aren't able to get out, I can't suggest going out against the orders of the quarantine. Now, that said, I think if it's about your body, then definitely finding ways to stay connected and have incentives of doing, I don't know if it's home workouts that people want to do or whatever it is that makes their body healthy. But I know I've seen all over over Facebook, all these videos of people doing really creative and interesting gestures towards not even just first responders and medical staff, but just ways that people are creatively connecting with others. I think of musicians who are doing balcony concerts for their neighborhoods, and like, how does that not put a smile on your face? Finding ways to just lift the spirits of the people around you, even from your home. If you can, I don't feel I'm a creative person, but I have my moments. Do as much as you can to be creative and to put a smile on somebody else's face, because what goes around comes around.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and one last thing. I know there's this trend going around, or this movement to essentially change the word from socially distancing to more physically distancing, as in you're just physically distant from people, but you can still connect socially. What do you think on that? And how do words, or the way we address the situation, how does it impact us, would you say?
It's a good question. I've thought about that. Nobody's asked me that, but I've thought about it, and I've noticed how people have started to talk more about physical distancing rather than social, because social distancing was the way that it originally was put out to us here in Canada, at least. Social distancing of 2 meters or 6 feet was what we were told. But yes, it is really more about the physical distancing. And I think that inherently, like, language is really important. And I kind of get off on that. I really like the minutia of what words are chosen and what the meanings mean. It's important for us, I think, to really realize that this is about physically having space from each other. And I also have to take into account our orders here in Canada are about like group sizes, and that's also part of physical distancing. It just happens that there's a social aspect of breaking groups that are larger than, say, 10 people or whatever. That kind of physical distancing bleeds into social distancing, but at the same time, we need social interactions. And so socially distancing should not look like not talking to your people over any video calling or phone calls or whatever. That would be a big no-no on my call, from my humble opinion, because we need to be socially connected in this time. We need to be physically distant, or physically more distant than before, but socially we do need to continue to lean into our support systems, because ideally that's how we heal, and that's how we grow as a society. Once again, this is not forever, but just know that for now, we're doing the best with what we can, and do as much as you can to spend time virtually with your friends and family, or whatever is possible for you.
Okay. Yeah, it's good. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great hearing from you and hearing your insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great. Thanks.